Holy smokes, I am back. How are my PCOS Powerhouse Tribe members doing today? I am so psyched for this training. Training number 2, all about PCOS and the keto diet. Such a big popular topic these days, isn't it? So I want to really jump into this and give you guys as much value as possible. All right, so what is ketosis, right? Now, look, obviously it's a very low carb state. Duh, bro. Most of us know what that is. But really, what else? What is ketosis really? So we're really referring to a state when the body is preferentially using ketones as an alternative fuel source to go into the mitochondria, which are these, it's an organelle, it's a powerhouse, I get it, powerhouse component of the cell that generates ATP, which is the energy currency of the body. So this starts off with, honestly, we make energy from carbs, protein, right, fat, but, fat is a triglyceride, right? So 3 fatty acids bound to glycerol, and glycerol is that one component of a triglyceride that can be actually converted to glucose, right? And that's important for the liver, red blood cells, etc. And that's because not everything in the body can use ketones as a fuel source. So the fatty acids become converted into a ketone, okay? And honestly, protein can be converted into ketones too. It's not just fat, all right? But in reality, we're using fat, protein, sugar, and ketones all the time, right? Like right now, you're using all of these, fuel sources to make energy. It's just in different degrees, depending on your diet, of course. And naturally, as sugar and carbs become less available, the body looks elsewhere. And amino acids will go to sugar, but there's not enough amino acids and protein in the body to convert into sugar to support the brain. And eventually it will halt that process, and it looks towards fatty acids to burn for energy. So if you look at the ketone factory right here, this is actually what goes on inside the cell. So normally these triglycerides, if you look at the top of the diagram, they break down into a number of substrates, fatty acetyl-CoA and eventually acetyl-CoA, and produce ATP by entering the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle. Now, this happens when glucose and carb intake is relatively moderate, right? But as far as more and more fatty acids become available to burn due to low sugar carb states, acetyl-CoA overloads this cycle, as you see here. And the cell can't keep up with that demand. So it changes paths, as you see down in the southeast corner of the diagram. The ketone production increases, and acetyl-CoA then suddenly turns into acetoacetate, which is one ketone, right? And then that can be diverted into acetone and beta-hydroxybutyrate. So ketone production increases, but not all organs can use ketones, right? Like I said, the brain can use ketones and does that because it can't use fatty acids for energy. So what exactly are the ketones, right? I just mentioned it, so you should know that already. So the liver makes most of these ketones. It has basically a ketone is a carbohydrate attached to 2 methyl groups, if you want to know the biochemistry there, and double bond to an oxygen molecule. So one of them is acetoacetate, like I mentioned. Now, this is one that is measured only through the urine. It is best measured through the urine. That's why you might hear about people doing urine sticks and stuff like that to measure their ketone levels. Another is beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB, which is measured in the blood. Okay, another way to measure that is popularized. And it's actually the most beneficial form ketone, that is. And that's because it makes the most energy, and it does most of the work. Okay. Now, acetone is the third one, and this is measured via the breath. And you might see people doing, measurements through the breath, and what they're doing is they're measuring their acetone levels. So here's the thing, right? So after 3 days of going into ketosis, acetoacetate and acetone increase, right? But then beta-hydroxybutyrate suddenly starts to rise, which is the major ketone. So the issue is that if you measure beta-hydroxybutyrate and right away, it may not look like you're in ketosis, but, right, you got to wait a bit. But if you measure the first two, acetoacetate and acetone, you can see that you're heading that direction. But again, you can't really rely solely on them. And beta hydroxybutyrate is actually more indicative of your ketosis state. So how do you know when you reach ketosis, right? Now, this is different for everybody, but for one, it can be as little as 25 grams to upwards of 20 to 75, I would say. It's not set in stone, but my experience, and that's what has shown me, and from my own personal trials. Okay, so somewhere in between. But what's important to know is that everyone hits ketosis at a different number. Some need to drop really low, around 20 to 30 grams, and others can get by with a little bit more, maybe upwards of 70 to 80. Okay? The other variable that must be considered, though, is protein, because protein can skew your ketosis state. So, well, how much protein, right? If you're too high in protein, you will stay out of ketosis because protein can turn into sugar, and that can obviously put you out of ketosis, right? Some people have a natural predilection for making more sugar from protein via gluconeogenesis in the liver. But if you ensure your protein intake is no more than around 20% of your calories, you'll probably be okay and stay in ketosis. But really, the best way, like I said before, I think, to measure your ketosis state is to check beta hydroxybutyrate via the blood. And you want to get around between 1 to 3 millimoles per liter of blood. Okay? This is the best way to measure your ketosis state. Measuring through keto sticks, right, which is measuring acetoacetate, right, as we mentioned before, is expelled in the urine, is not reliable because in the beginning phases of ketosis, it increases but then declines. Okay, so like I said before, you can measure in the beginning. It'll give you an idea if you're there or not, but eventually it's going to drop off, and you're going to want to measure beta hydroxybutyrate anyway. So you want to kind of wait a few days to measure BHB. But if you want to test, in the urine, then go do that as well, but don't only rely on that. Now, breath measurement, which is measuring acetone, along with blood, BHB, is also a good idea too. They seem to correlate pretty well. All right. So what are the benefits of keto, right? It's really important to realize that there is a psychological impact. Okay, for one thing, right? For some people, they just are able to kick ass on it. It suppresses their hunger really well, which is what ketones do. They have a really good, impact on suppressing your hunger. And that's how you can achieve a caloric deficit more easily. But we need to understand that there is no special advantage, no evidence that supports that keto diets work better than a higher carb diet in terms of weight loss when calories are accounted for. Okay? So you can stop buying into that bullshit stuff out there on social media. Okay? All the gurus who are saying that keto is better and it's going to yield more fat loss. No, it won't. It really won't. The only sort of instance where it may is if you're severely insulin resistant, which I'll come back to. Okay? But people who are of normal healthy weight, they are not going to see an advantage when calories are equal. Right? So it really, you induce fat loss with keto because of this psychological impact. Like I said, it suppresses your hunger really well. For a lot of people, not always, everyone though. Now also, as I mentioned, it's going to have a massive benefit on your hormones, namely insulin sensitivity, right? So if you're insulin resistant, which is very common in PCOS, for a lot of people, it's largely the underpinning of the entire condition. Not necessarily everybody, depending on your type, if you remember from training number 1. But if you are insulin sensitive, insulin resistant dominant, you're obese, right? This is going to be, keto actually can be really useful. Not always, though, because not everybody can handle keto, okay? Now, lastly, ketones are really good at extinguishing free radicals, which is obviously beneficial for delaying aging, cancer, disease, your neurodegenerative diseases in general, and really helping out with just preventing a lot of ailments in the future. Okay, so there is a lot of evidence for that. Epilepsy, Alzheimer's, that's out of the scope of this this training, but there are a lot of clinical advantages. So what are the pitfalls of keto, right? Some have the opposite effect, where cravings for carbs and sugar are the result, and people then just binge. They have cravings for sugar, they binge. And the reason why keto may not be conducive for you is because of the psychological effect it has, where you're more prone to cravings despite what you do to try to suppress it. And this comes back to individuality, because regardless of what you do, read and see, about other people doing this, following this diet, because they may find benefit from it, but you may not. And that's where it comes back to individuality. You are your own unique person, and you have to honor that. It can be mentally challenging to endure, right? You're not eating carbs. You're no more bagels, no more waffles, right? No more ice cream. And that is tough. So we have to respect that. And if you're not able to endure it, then maybe keto isn't best for you, and you need a modified version, which would be just, lower carb intake. Not necessarily keto though. Right? But like I said, if you're trying to do for weight loss, well, what's the point? Right? If you're trying to do for health reasons, it's more of a practical reason, I would say. If the keto, and if the keto diet has been prolonged for a few months, beyond 2 or 3 months, it can definitely cause massive carb binges, right? Even if you've been tolerating it for several months, you might get to a threshold where you can't any longer. So you want to pay attention to your hunger and craving levels. Monitor blood ketones as well to see if you are able to handle it. And lastly, you can be on the lower end of fiber requirements. So, for women, it's, I think, around 35 grams. That's the daily intake. But that's something you want to consider. And you can definitely supplement with fiber, psyllium husk and all these fiber supplements to pick up the slack if necessary. Okay, but just something to be aware of. All right, now specifically with PCOS and keto, what is the deal? So we have to understand and embrace this heterogeneity of PCOS, right? The distinctions between the types. I've seen keto work very well for some women, and a study even supports that, but it doesn't apply to everybody. Not just from the psychological point of view, but keto can help with insulin resistance and reversing that. If you are the obese insulin resistant type, this might be for you. If you're the lean PCOS type, where you have a lot of androgens and you're stressed, that's really the reason why you're here with PCOS, then keto is not really the right move for you. It can actually compound the stress. So let's talk about the insulin resistant type. For the female who is obese, has insulin resistance, then keto is going to be helpful, potentially, right? Like I said, right? The low insulin states will stop feeding the cycle and improve insulin sensitivity with other modalities included, though. You can't just solely rely on diet and keto to get your PCOS reversed. Now, if the female is in decent shape, especially lean, just has a lot of stress-induced PCOS, like I mentioned, keto may not be as helpful as much. It can actually aggravate it, like I said, because it's too stressful. The mechanism here might be that the brain would perceive the stress, raise cortisol in order to make more glucose from the fat and protein, which could, it can contribute to insulin resistance itself and indirectly increase more testosterone and vice versa. High testosterone states from stress and insulin resistance. So either way, the cortisol increase can impact literally everything, like the thyroid and your menstrual cycle. So a low to moderate-ish carb intake is likely better. My experience has shown me with clients that somewhere around 100 to 150 grams of carbs is really effective. Now, that includes, to an extent, heavy PCOS, insulin resistant type as well, I have been successful with that. So I've not actually used keto really for anyone and with PCOS. Not to say that wouldn't work, and it might be useful and needed in some instances, but my experience has shown me that sort of like the lower end of carbs, but outside of keto is effective too. So how long should you follow it for if you were to do keto? I don't recommend necessarily doing it beyond 2 or 3 months. And it's for exactly the reasons I mentioned before about you being unable to endure it, right? People want to live their life, I think, and enjoy foods they enjoy, right? And people will adopt a long-term keto diet, like do it for years, I've seen. And my recommendation is not to do that, right? For 3 months or so, fine, that's acceptable. Assuming it's tolerable, it can yield benefit and reverse a lot of these, biochemical issues and concomitant symptoms. All right. So what is the take-home message here? The take-home. Listen, here's the deal. Ketones is pivotal, right, to having a flexible metabolism. That's what it comes down to. It's important for health in general, right? There are times out of the year, I think, from, our ancestors who were out and about hunting and gathering, right, where they didn't have access to certain foods. So like they were naturally in a ketogenic state. And that's fine, but we don't need to be there all the time. We adapted to other types of diets. But it's not to say that ketones are not useful. They are. They're beneficial for DNA, brain health, oxidative stress, weight loss, right? But doing keto is not truly conducive long-term because we didn't evolve that way, right? In short term, it is because we've lived through periods of the year where we adapted to that diet during the winter seasons. But we also adapted to higher carb diets as well. So whatever you do, the bottom line is this, guys. Listen to your psychological cues, your hunger, your cravings, your energy, right? And respect what your body is saying. I say this over and over all the time on social media. Your intuition never lies. You just need to listen what's inside. Listen what's inside. Okay? Pay attention, have awareness, and respect it. It's trying to serve you, but you have to listen to it and answer back appropriately. And remember, though, a diet alone may not truly reverse your PCOS. It's just one piece of the complex puzzle. Okay? We got to remember that. Like, things are not as simple as taking diet and supplements or changing your diet and taking supplements. There's a lot of moving parts here. So the point of this training is to educate you and give you some sort of idea on, well, what can you do with your diet? But if you find benefit from that and you reverse your symptoms and your hormones are on track and you test for it and you're all good, then awesome. Hell yeah, I'm proud. I'm proud of you and I'm really happy to hear that. But if you're frustrated and you're not getting results from just doing a keto diet or dropping your carb intake and all that stuff, then don't be frustrated because it's not that simple. Like, you need to do a lot of other things too. And that's why we're having this training. It's why we're having this Facebook group to help you, give you the tools to head down that path to success and give you the outcomes you want. All right, so that's it for PCOS and keto. I hope that was really helpful for you guys. If you have any questions about this and I can serve you in any other way, please drop in the comment section below. All right, that's all for me. Justin here. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the PCOS Powerhouse Facebook group. Take care, guys.